So good afternoon, Tim. How are you on this fine sunny day?
I'm the very best, the very best. Looking forward. It's Thursday and we're just before bank holiday. I mean, it's great. It's
Good
middle
man.
of summer, the sun's shining.
Good man. It is indeed. It is indeed. So Tim, tell me a little about you and what you do, please.
Hi, well, I'm the Chief Executive of ArC21. And as ArC21, it's responsible for dealing with the waste on behalf of 6 councils on the eastern seaboard, from Ballymena to Newry. My background, I came out of 2 decades worth of managing waste in Belfast City Council. I've been in local government for 25 years or so, as a head of service or chief executive more recently, dealing with ArC21, dealing with waste. So I am a professional waster, deeply embedded in waste. I have numerous degrees and professional qualifications. I sit on panels for DEFRA in London. I sit on panels with local government across the country. I sit on the advisory committee on packaging. And I'm also a future president of the Institute of Waste Management. So I'm deeply steeped in waste and resources and materials. So this is all about materials management. So ArC21 deals with the waste that the majority of waste, that the 6 councils pick and remove. That's to deal with the organic waste in the brown bins. It's to deal with the blue bins or green bins and boxes, and it's to deal with the black bin waste. So we've put in place contracts over close on 20 years worth something in the order of about 400 million pounds, dealing with north of 30 million tons over that time. So we're a well-kept secret in the local government public sector. We are effectively a local council.
So, I mean, a lot of people won't have heard of ArC21 before, but there's a fair chunk of the Northern Ireland population that will now realise that's who looks after what goes into their various coloured bins. So what happens, tell me what happens in layman's terms, Tim, whenever it gets taken away from people's residence and places of work?
Sure. Well, we're a contracting authority underpinned by legislation. So our job is on behalf of those 6 councils to buy services or to buy facilities for dealing with the waste. So depending on which waste type it is, it'll go to one of the various facilities we've procured in Northern Ireland. So the blue bin stuff, the box stuff goes to a facility, a social enterprise up in the Belfast Hills, or it goes to a facility in Newry. The grey bin waste, the black bin waste, the residual waste goes to landfill sites. And there's a couple of landfill sites in the greater Belfast area, although one of those is coming to the end of its days. So we're going through a process just now to put in place a new contract or new series of contracts to deal with residual waste, which may rely more increasingly upon export just now. We've obviously been planning how to deal with waste over the number of years. I'll come on to that just in a minute, because I'll finish off on the brown bin waste, which goes to a facility in the interface between Belfast and Lisburn, where it's processed to produce a compost. And it's a high-grade compost that you can use on your fields, on your in your garden, and some of the councils buy it for use in their parks. But the big issue for us is what to do with residual waste. Our big driver is we must increase recycling. Now, there's some very difficult conversations to be had as we go on, because one of the questions about waste is just how much stuff we consume. We consume an awful lot of stuff. And as we go into a different future, we need to have a bigger conversation about how we consume. But that's not for today. Our plans, which we've had in place for a number of years and through a number of iterations or additions, effectively map out what we're looking to do with the wastes, not just that the councils generate, but the wastes across our entire area. We're responsible, statutorily responsible, for dealing with our waste. So, and our big proposal was to build a facility to deal with the residual waste up in Glengormley, Mollusk. And that's going through due process, which has proven quite tricky to date. But nevertheless, we're ploughing ahead, because this facility would bring us into line with what's going on elsewhere in the UK and Ireland and Europe. And without this kind of a technology, we are reliant on an ever diminishing number of landfill sites and an increasing amount of waste exported overseas. And we've all seen the dispatches programs. We've all seen the panorama programs about shock revelations about waste turning up in Indonesia or in Poland or in all sorts of places. And export raises the prospect that sometimes things don't happen as you might think they happen.
So what would you say, Tim, have been your biggest learnings, both in work and in life in general?
It's a really tricky question because there's an issue about things like tenacity, keeping on going despite, having all sorts of barriers placed in your way or all sorts of difficulties to overcome. Bravery, making brave decisions, making brave recommendations and having to stand by them and having to defend them. These are key principles, which this probably sounds a bit strange for a local government officer to be talking about. But that ability to just keep on going, regardless of circumstance, because ultimately, when you're dealing with waste, this isn't an academic exercise. It's generated in our region to the tune of thousands of tons a day. We have to deal with that. This isn't some esoteric idea about, well, wouldn't it be nice if we had a better future? Right here, right now, standing, I can look out the window and see numerous bins on the street. They have to be managed today, tomorrow, next week, next year. So very much focused on getting stuff done.
And Tim, who's been the most influential mentor or character in your life?
There's a few. When I started in this area of work, and as I said earlier on, as a professional waster, there's not a lot of us. And at the time, there was a great head of waste and contaminated land in the Department of the Environment, a guy called Steve Aston. And he just had such an idea, such a vision, and he was so charismatic about presenting what the future could be. And I found him very influential. But then there were others followed him. And one of my early bosses in Belfast City Council, a guy called William Francie, his attention to detail and his focus and his intellectual rigor were, just awe-inspiring, because they really caused me to have to tighten up my game in terms of accuracy, in terms of detail, in terms of precision. And then, of course, there was my predecessor in R21. John Quinn. He was a very, very principled engineer, and his far-sighted view as to what Northern Ireland, and more particularly what the 6 councils were going to need in the future, still stands up very well, even though we first articulated this a decade ago. It's really withstood the test of time and is still an exemplar of what we need to give us a good baseline to go forward. Now, we're in a period of massive change in terms of waste and resources management. And Northern Ireland risks being left behind if it doesn't put this base technology in place, because we'll be forever caught in a loop of playing catch up or reliant on the private sector, which is quite an exposed area to be in. And from our perspective, the idea of investing so much time and effort into this kind of approach is so that we have got a better handle on the provision of facilities for the benefit of the councils through generating revenue streams for the councils, which will offset any of their costs. Things like energy feedback to the councils. We did a calculation which showed in March, there was a €4 million potential revenue from that 1 month alone, based on the current energy prices. And that would have been split, obviously, between ourselves and the contractor. But at that sort of level of investment, councils are in a difficult place at the minute. Money's tight. The sale of residue as a product for building aggregate, the sale of energy, the generation of energy could really help offset some of these unexpected costs coming down the pipeline for councils. So to turn our back on this, to ignore this, is kind of perverse, especially when we're reliant on importing energy to us. And then we're taking an energy potential in residual waste and we're exporting it overseas. That's kind of nuts.
Yeah, well, I guess the importation of energy has been highlighted, certainly exacerbated in the last few months. I think everybody will have felt some pain from that front. So do you have any favorite quotes or sayings at all that you've picked up or that you like along the years?
The one that's in my mind when you ask that question is festina lente, hasten slowly. You know, and it means we've got to move. We can't stay where we are. You know, we're into a changing world, but you need to get your skates on, but do so in a measured manner. So,
Okay.
you know, there is that sense of timeliness, and there is that sense of, yeah, but there can't be a rootedness. We've got to move. We can't stay here.
And what would you say is the biggest challenge that you face in your role at the minute, Tim?
Well, there's definitely an issue of understanding and appreciation and engagement. You know, everybody is becoming green. Where I'm coming from, I've been treading these boards for decades. And as I outlined at the top of this meeting, you know, I'm not coming to this lightly. I've gained a number of accolades along the way, and one of the most surprising one was in the last year, where I was named as one of the top 100 environmentalists in the UK, according to one of the most serious environmental journals, which I have to say totally caught me on the hop. And I still haven't found out who put me forward, which is vexing me. Nevertheless, you know, it's great that people are getting the message, but there needs to be a pragmatism about this. This is not a light switch moment. We can't just go from where we are now and just turn the corner into something different. There is a transition between where we are now as a wasteful society into being a wasteless society. That transition is going to take decades. And we need to recognize that and build the appropriate facilities and infrastructure to allow us that breathing space to transition. If we don't do that, we're on the road to nowhere. There's going to be a real crunch coming. And so the issue here is we need to be pragmatic. We need to be sensible. And at the minute, that is something that our aspirations, and we're seeing this in legislation, we're seeing this in policy, doesn't seem to connect with the reality of what's around us. So there's a gap appearing between our stated intention and what we're actually doing.
What advice would you give? Sometimes it might be easy for people to think, well, what difference could I make? But I guess the collective can make a massive difference. So what advice would you give to people out there as to what the general public can do to make a difference and make it a better environment for Northern Ireland in the longer term?
Well, it's a really good question. Everybody's responsible and everybody's got a role to play. And it could be from as simple as making sure you put your right waste in the right bin at the right time. And if you don't know, pick up the phone and ring your local council or check out their website as to what goes where and when. To other things, such as cutting back on how much you buy. You know, going out with a shopping list. And again, your local council have lots of advice and guidance in terms of how to buy better. But there's also things like if every person was to go out on every trip and pick up one piece of litter, that would have a profound impact. Don't walk past this thing and say, oh, well, there's somebody employed to do that and that's their job. You know, take a degree of responsibility. Don't just pick up your own litter, pick up somebody else's litter in passing as well. I didn't mention, I'm also on the board of Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. And one of my big challenges going forward will be to ask people, to ask my institute, how can we not only keep recycling going, but how can we actually improve the environment around us? How can we move to a more regenerative stage where what we as a sector do makes the world better, not just so we're treading water where we are now, but that we're actually improving it. And that's a big challenge. And so I'm afraid I really bore the pants off my family because I'm always the person at the very back picking up litter behind me, and my daughter and my wife turn around and go, not again, as I pick up, you know, fag butts and poop fairy stuff, you know, all this stuff that other people leave behind. And you're going, ultimately, it has to go somewhere. And if there isn't somebody else around to do it, it's my small contribution.
Well, Tim, that's a great way to finish. So, like, it's been really interesting. It's certainly an education for me. Every day is a school day, but this particularly so. So, listen, thanks very much for telling about your story and about ARC21. And I guess there'll be people that will watch and listen to this that will hopefully take heed of your advice. And we certainly, I think, collectively would certainly love for Northern Ireland to have a long-term greener future. So Tim Walker of ARC21, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and there are details on our website, www.arc21.org.uk, if you want to see more or learn more about it, and we or I can be contacted through that. So thanks for the opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And